I'm Marian, Lyman, Kirst, and I'm a resident of Billings, Montana. Montana, I think, is really famous, as its name implies, for its wealth of mountain ranges, a lot of which are concentrated in the western part of the state, and they're really characterized by this rugged glacial sculpting and classic alpine ecology. And while that's very interesting, I think a lot of the ranges can really be very similar to one another, at least when compared to the Pryor Mountains. The Pryors are infinitely more interesting, even though they're much smaller. It's as if the whole of the American West has been condensed and centralized into this tiny little range. In a single day of exploring, you can hike slick rock canyons and see petroglyphs and pictographs. You can observe horned lizards, rattlesnakes, scorpions in the high desert flats and up on the plateaus. You can hike these limestone ridges that are just rich with shell fossils. And you can picnic in the subalpine meadows, which, if you catch them at the right time, are just carpeted in blue lupin and pink wild geranium. And it's just incredible. My childhood is really bound up in this range, particularly Big Pryor Mountain, where I spent a lot of my free time growing up and the most time with my parents. They love to use the Pryors as a sort of living classroom in which to teach me about geology, history, botany, wildlife, and paleontology. The Pryors are where I first learned to cut firewood, where I caved for the first time with my father. I learned to drive on Helt and Gyp Springs roads. The Pryors are even where I had my first kiss with a middle school boyfriend that I was so excited to show Bear Canyon and Ship Rock to. It's not a stretch for me to say that the Pryor Mountains mean a great deal to me, and are a big reason why I chose to return to Montana after college and to settle in Billings as opposed to, say, Bozeman or Helena. Since I returned to Montana, I got a degree in science journalism, and I'm particularly interested in invertebrate conservation issues, so I'm pursuing a degree in entomology, and this fits really well with what the Pryors has to offer in terms of invertebrate ecology. There are some specimens and some creatures in the Pryors that I've had trouble finding anywhere else in Montana. For example, it's one of the best places in Montana to find the northern scorpion, which is the only scorpion that Montana has. And the dry swales off of Helt Road, sort of before you get into the Bear Canyon area, are one of the only places I've been able to find Phytia aetera, which is a beautiful scorpion-colored wingless assassin bug. In Bear Canyon on the Pryors' southwest side, the leaves of blooming chokecherry bushes serve as landing and staging platforms for a really remarkable square-headed wasp from the genus Crabro. And I've been going there the past 2 years to try and get pictures of these wasps, and I finally was able to get some last summer. And of course, the Pryors are home to myriad bee and butterfly species, which likely use those blooming wildflower meadows in the subalpine regions as sort of sanctuaries and places to refuel between migration trips and before the neighboring cropland is ready for pollination. From the Vermilion Valley alone, you can get a stunning visual layout of the Pryor Range's 200 million year history. And then if you continue along, you can find things like fish fossils, pieces of coral. It's just so rich in paleontological and geological resources. Billings and surrounding area educators are beginning to key in on the Pryors' value as a teaching tool. And managing agencies, I think, should really take advantage of this for the purposes of collaborative research and citizen science projects. For students, having access to biological and geological hotspots like the Pryors creates a sense of place and history. It helps contextualize difficult scientific concepts for students, and it increases the chance that in the future they'll give a damn about the place where they come from and the place where they grew up. I'll never forget, for instance, the experience I had in high school when, as part of an earth science class, we took a field trip to the Pryors, and we were told to search and find crinoid stems and belemnite fossils, which for students who didn't really understand the concept of this area at one time being a shallow sea was really remarkable. Billings' two colleges have used the area extensively for research and for various student projects. For example, my mother, Dr. Jennifer Lyman, as a former botany professor at Rocky, would take her students up there all the time in the summer to look at range ecology, effects of grazing on land, and also just to key out interesting plants. There are a few species of plants that exist only in the Pryors and are found nowhere else, which is really remarkable for such a small mountain range. As a member of the sciences fields, one of my biggest concerns for the Pryors is just basic inventorying of the species that are there. I think the Pryors, as a sort of a biological hotspot in the middle of this kind of desert prairie, is a really remarkable thing, and there is no doubt in my mind that there are some very interesting, potentially new species to be discovered, as well as some range extensions, which haven't been documented yet. And the way to do that is to really just get in there and take a baseline inventory of what species exist there now. And we got sort of close to this with a BioBlitz a few years ago, and it was the most fun and enjoyable couple of days where you had people from around the state coming to the Pryors and really, I think, being surprised by what they found there. Something like 700 plus species that we documented in just a couple of days, including, to my great delight, I think more than 50 spider and arachnid species, which was fabulous. And I really think when federal agencies start to think about how they're going to manage this area, that's something they just simply have to take into consideration, is that this is a place that, because it's so unique in terms of its microhabitat wealth, and how quickly it changes in terms of elevation, they're going to have to think about how species are being affected by things like climate change, because it's going to happen in the Pryors faster and more dramatically than it will in a larger, more spread out mountain range. In the Pryors, you get these views where you look out and it seems like within just a few inches of your vision, the landscape has changed completely. You'll be in the foreground, from the top of Big Pryor, for example, you'll have this just beautiful wash of color, pinks and whites and blues of the wildflowers. But then your vision drops slightly, and you get this incredible. The colors change to these pastels of the high desert canyons and coulee area, where you've got the sort of burnt auburns and reds and light greens of the sagebrush and the sandstone together. And then as you sort of move south and you hit the Vermilion Valley, it's just remarkable. You suddenly are struck with this bright cinnamon red colored soil, and against the blue Montana spring and summer sky, there's really nothing like it. Part of what makes the Pryor Range so unique is the fact that, unlike a lot of the surrounding mountain ranges, the Pryors were not glaciated, and so that allowed native peoples to inhabit and use this area for many years. I mean, I think people have discovered resources from as far back as 13,000 years ago, which is really remarkable. One thing that you'll quickly notice when you're walking along the Pryors flatlands or even up into the high desert plateaus is just how much raw material native peoples who used and hunted in the Pryor Range had to work with to make their weapons and their knives and arrowheads. I think that kind of exposure to cultural heritage right at your feet or on a rock wall is really pretty impactful and is important for people to have, to connect us to this place and to realize that there were native peoples here. I do think that it's clear at this point that federal and state oversight of this area and its myriad habitats has just simply not kept pace with public use. I think there's this idea out there that because the neighboring beartooths are a much larger range, they require the bulk of agency attention. But use and public activity are diluted in a larger range, like the Beartooth and Absaroka Mountains. Whereas in the Pryors, you have a situation where public use is increasing over a much smaller area. And so the pressure is great and the results are visible everywhere. So I'm hopeful more focused attention will be paid to the Pryors and how to maintain them, not just for recreational use, but also for ecological, geological, and cultural heritage of this area. I think the Pryors are just absolutely special. I think one of the biggest challenges is going to be getting the National Park Service, the Forest Service, BLM, the Crow Tribe, and all of the various stakeholders like myself and the ATV crowd, the horse crowd, all of these people together to try and homogenize management across these various agencies and groups. It's really the only way that you can sort of fairly manage a very small and unique place like the Pryors. And that's especially important to me now because my husband and I are expecting our first child, and I want nothing more than to take them to the Pryors and share with them an experience very similar to what I experienced growing up.
My name is Burton Pryor Sr., and my Crow Indian name that I received in a vision quest on top of the Crazy Mountains, Awakawipia, is what we call the Crazy Mountains. My Indian name I have received within that dream on the third morning of my 4-day fast without food and water. The name that I heard in that vision was Chirakshaduba. Translation means 2 mornings. This is the doorway here into these sacred mountains. We get permission from the Creator to come in a good way. We get permission from the little people. We get permission from the animals, the birds, the fishes that's in these creeks, the eagle, other birds that fly up in the air. We get permission from them to come into their home in a good way, and we leave in a good way. The Pryors are important to us in our human history that's been handed down from generation to generation within our oral history. And a lot of our stories, the origin of our people has always considered the Pryor Mountains, Awakawa, as very sacred to us because on that particular mountain we have had skirmishes with other Plains tribes. When we went into that sacred mountain for protection, for shelter, they would often turn around and leave. The Apsaloga always believed that those mountains is like our place of getting medicine and herbs and things for different ailments. Also, in the mountains we find plants that we're able to take from the ground and eat for as part of our survival. The berries that we pick, the turnips and all these things that we took from the mountain again. So the bear root is used in our naming ceremonies. We use that in our ceremonies, we use that in purifications, we use that as part of our medicine. When one individual has a sore throat or an ailment of some kind, we take that bear root, boil it, and drink the fluid from that, and it eliminates your sore throat and illnesses. So also we have vision quest sites on different parts of the mountain which are very important for us. Our leaders such as Alachchiahush, Pleniku, Biduush, Bell Rock, Pedachiwachbash, Medicine Crow. As young men they fasted in those peaks. And we have some burial sites within those mountain peaks and those ravines that we use for burial sites in days past. So overall, that whole mountain is sacred for us. Even though some of it is off reservation now, we still, in our mind, we still claim them, we still hold those sacred. So the whole Pryors is very important for us. This place we consider as our church, our sacred place for prayer. Our church is the wilderness out here that God has put in place. It's our shrine. It's a place of worship, our altar that we go to for prayer. So, speaking on behalf of the animals that live here in this sacred mountain, they're the voiceless ones. It is up to us as spiritual leaders to protect those birds, the fishes, and everything that is calling this sacred mountain their home. We're trying to protect their area. They're the voiceless ones. Only we, as human beings, can speak on their behalf. I'm sure that every individual that comes in here has a special interest that they have to come up here. And we had hoped that our non-Indian brothers and sisters that do come here come with the reverence and respect that the Apsáalooke have when they come into these mountains, that we want to protect this area so that my children, especially my great-grandchildren, when they grow up and have their own children, that this sacred mountain will be there for them. My purpose coming up here is to reflect of the past and those stories that my grandfather shared with me, and it comes alive as I come in here, and I feel the spirit of my grandfather, my dad, and it's still very powerful.